Once again, it's time for our monthly trip back to 1968. April 1968 was a particularly excellent month for singles. So without further ado, let's take a look at some cool British singles released that month.
It's the time of the season when love runs high.
April 1968 saw the release of the last and final single by the Zombies. The album Odyssey and Oracle was also released the same month. Both releases were issued just a week after the Zombies announced that they were breaking up due to lack of success. Disc magazine journalist Penny Valentine wrote,
"The saddest news last week was that my beloved Zombies are to split. To appreciate my feelings on the subject, just listen to Time of the Season, and then shed a tear for the complete ignorance of the public that has forced him to disband."
Record Mirror wrote,
"I'm saddened by the news that this group is splitting up, for they show again that they have more ideas than most, but it is slightly over-complex for the charts."
Odyssey and Oracle also enjoyed excellent reviews in the press, and was regarded as Album of the Month by several publications. But unfortunately, the record-buying public didn't seem to care. Upon release, the single was a commercial failure. A few months later, however, American musician Al Kooper, who at the time was working as a producer for CBS Records, traveled to the UK and bought several British albums in record stores from London. Odyssey and Oracle was one of the albums he purchased. Al Kooper returned to the States, and he was so impressed by the record that he managed to persuade label boss Clive Davis to release the album in America. In early 1969, almost a year after the group disbanded, Time of the Season was released as a single in the United States, and it became a major hit. The single reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, and number 1 according to Cashbox. The single, however, never charted in their native Britain, despite being re-released twice.
Wouldn't it be nice to get on with me neighbours? But they make it very clear they've got to move the rain.
Another highlight from April 1968 was this single by the Small Faces. Both sides of the single were eventually featured on their album Ogden's Nut Gone Flake, which was released a month later. The B-side was an excellent track called Rolling Over. The single got excellent reviews in the press. The New Musical Express wrote,
"Quite the most original single the Small Faces have waxed. It's light-hearted, thoroughly entertaining, and by the way, extremely clever. It opens with Steve singing in an exaggerated cockney accent about Sunday suburban life, with a few asides thrown in for the neighbours' benefit. There's a kazoo sequence, scat vocal passages, birds twittering, bells ringing, and a church organ. Add to this a very catchy and cute melody, and you've got the novelty of the year. A huge hit." The flip features the Faces in their more accepted style. It's moody and twangy, with an impassioned vocal by Steve.
Lazy Sunday became a massive hit in Britain. The single reached number 2, and remained in the top 40 for 11 weeks. Despite its success, however, the single was released against the band's wishes, and this contributed to Marriott's departure.
As the world's been pouring in, and I don't know what I want to be anymore.
One of the psychedelic highlights of April 1968 was this single by a band called The Fox. The song, with its buzzing sitar riff and great bouncing groove, featured ex-Traffic member Dave Mason guesting on sitar. The group was led by lead singer Winston G. and guitarist Top Topham, who had been the original Yardbirds guitarist before Eric Clapton joined the band. The B-side was a heavier track called Seek and You Find. The single was barely reviewed in the press and went pretty much unnoticed. In late 1968, another band started using the name Fox, so the group was forced to change their name to The Whip. This single by Pink Floyd was the first to feature new guitarist David Gilmour following the departure of Syd Barrett. The song was written by keyboardist Rick Wright.
Everybody wakes, and in the morning
Musical Express wrote,
My copy bears a message saying that it's a specially edited and shortened version for broadcasting purposes. Despite that, it still runs 3 minutes, so goodness knows how long the ordinary shop-sold copies will last. However, you get far more than just excess time on this disc. The main body of the performance is a Kinks-like jogging good time, but all manner of other effects are thrown in for good measure. A pulsating, voluminous chorus, tempo changes, crashing cymbals, and fuzz guitars. In fact, it ends up sounding like a psychedelic teenage opera. But I'm not being derisive. There's a catchy melody line, an absorbing lyric, and a fascinating sound. It could well be a sizable hit.
The B-side, Julia Dream, was written by Roger Waters, who was gradually transitioning into his eventual role as the predominant songwriter. The single received very little airplay, and it failed to enter the British charts. This B-side by a psychedelic band called The Barrier is another highlight from April 1968. The group's live shows, which involved fire breathing, were pretty wild, and the band enjoyed more success in Europe than in their native Britain. The Barrier released 3 singles in 1968, and this B-side is by far their greatest effort. The A-side was an awful song called Georgie Brown, which the group was forced to record by their record label.
Georgie Brown, take a look around and everyone you see is Georgie Brown.
Record Mirror wrote,
4 blokes from the Fulham area in West London turned professional as The Barrier only in November last year, following the signing of a recording contract with the indie iMark label. Early this year they played a lengthy tour of Germany and France, returning to promote their first single, Georgie Brown, which is nothing at all to do with a certain politician. Eric Francis is lead singer, organist and guitarist. Alan Francis is on bass, Del Dwyer on lead guitar, and Alan Brooks on drums.
This B-side achieved cult status among psychedelic enthusiasts when the song was featured on several compilations in the 80s, and the song was re-released in 2013 by the Top Sounds label. April 1968 also saw the release of this excellent single by the Kinks. The single got great reviews in the press. The New Musical Express wrote,
Ray Davies has an incredible flair for writing lyrics of a beautifully descriptive nature. He always gets straight to the point, combining simplicity of thought with a penchant for the more colourful and pleasurable thing in life. And his dislike of complex, enigmatic words is again evident in this charming, philosophic song. What's more, the tune is as catchy as anything he has written, harmonious and lilting, with the Kinks providing a continuous accompaniment to his solo vocal. The beat flows along at a relaxed, easygoing pace, and there's an ear-catching, rippling backing. This is a very good pop record indeed, and if anything, I rate it even more commercial than Autumn Almanac or Waterloo Sunset. It deserves to be big, and it will be.
The B-side was a song called Pretty Polly. The single stalled at number 36, becoming the band's first single not to make the top 20 since their early covers.
Have you ever seen a carousel? Thrown your pennies in a wishing.
By 1968, The Creation were pretty much over as a group. Guitarist and leader Eddie Phillips had already left the band in late 1967, and the group officially ceased to exist in February 1968. But despite their lack of success in Britain, The Creation enjoyed quite a bit of popularity in Germany, where there was still demand for Creation records and live shows. As a result, drummer Jack Jones formed a new Creation lineup. Jones brought back lead singer Kenny Pickett and bassist Kim Gardner, and the group recruited Ronnie Wood as their new guitarist. The group toured Germany for the next 2 months, and then disbanded again. But during their brief existence, this new lineup of the group recorded 6 songs which were released as singles throughout 1968. This was the first of those 3 releases. Record Mirror wrote,
Mid-tempo this time, and the group, so near to big stardom, tackle a rolling sort of song with a strong style sense, good performance and treatment.
The B-side was a song called The Girls Are Naked. The single failed to chart in Britain, but enjoyed moderate success in Germany. After the split, Ronnie Wood went back to playing bass for Jeff Beck. Kim Gardner formed Ashton Gardner and Dyke. And later in 1968, lead singer Kenny Pickett became Led Zeppelin's sound mixer.
Wheels on fire, rolling down the road.
One of the biggest British hits of April 1968 was this Dylan cover by Julie Driscoll, Brian Auger, and the Trinity. The song was written and first recorded by Dylan in 1967 during the sessions known as the Basement Tapes. This cover, with its use of distortion and phasing effects, is one of the most psychedelic sounding tracks that the Trinity ever recorded. The Melody Maker wrote,
Julie on a Bob Dylan song, with Brian helping out on the vocal chorus as well as throwing in some slipping and sliding organ. Their best single yet, Mean and Moody. The climax is tremendous, with the bass and orchestra riffing behind the organ.
The single became a massive hit, reaching number 5 in Britain, and also becoming a top 10 hit in several European countries. The single also reached number 13 in Canada, but it was a commercial failure in the States, where it only managed to reach number 106.
Everyone is saying what to do and what to think. When to ask permission when you feel you want to blink.
Songwriter and guitarist Rory Gallagher founded Taste in Ireland in 1966. In 1968, the group moved to London and released their debut single in April. Blister on the Moon is one of the heaviest tracks from April 1968. The song, with its aggressive guitar-based sound, seemed to anticipate the sort of heavy sounds that would become really popular in the very late 60s. Both sides of the single were featured on the band's debut album, which wasn't released until a year later in April 1969. The B-side of the single was another excellent song called Born on the Wrong Side of Time.
On the wrong side of time. Even your best friend's ready to watch you die.
The single wasn't even reviewed in the press, and its lack of success is probably the main reason why the band had to wait a full year to see the release of their debut record. Taste only managed to record 2 studio albums during their brief existence. The group broke up in 1970, shortly after the release of their second LP. April 1968 saw the release of the debut single by Tyrannosaurus Rex. Mark Bolan founded Tyrannosaurus Rex in July 1967, following a handful of failed solo singles and a brief career as lead guitarist in psychedelic band John's Children. Tyrannosaurus Rex enjoyed a devoted following in the thriving hippie underground scene. Disc jockey John Peel, who was a huge fan of the duo, constantly played their music on his radio show, and this constant airplay helped them reach a bigger audience. The Melody Maker wrote,
Now Mark is achieving a measure of recognition with the aid of his bongo-playing mate and DJ John Peel. This has all the simplicity of production and sound that gave the early Buddy Holly records their appeal. It's just a 12-string and bongo backing driving along Mark's peculiar and highly distinctive voice. It is the voice of a small gnome or hobbit, and one can imagine Mark dancing about on a toadstool. It's not too way out, even for those who don't like John Peel's show. And the combination of Mark's intriguing vocal style and the odd tune should help them into the charts.
Deborah became an unexpected top 40 hit. The single reached number 34 and managed to stay in the top 40 for 4 weeks. In 2017, the song was featured on the soundtrack of the film Baby Driver. This dark and sinister sounding single is one of the psychedelic highlights of April 1968.
Find what you get, you won't regret with me.
The song was produced by Wirtz, who achieved his commercial peak as the producer of Excerpt from a Teenage Opera, which became a massive hit in Europe in 1967. The artist behind this single was Dan Stevens, who had previously been a member of the Fairies in the mid-60s. The Fairies featured musicians such as Twink, who later became well known as the drummer for bands such as Tomorrow and The Pretty Things. Penny Valentine wrote,
I don't like the ghostly feel about the voice of Zion de Gallia. But the production by Wirtz, with watery and creeping arrangement, is splendid.
Not surprisingly, the creeping and sinister sound of the song went over the heads of radio DJs, and not even John Peel, who was known for playing music that was deemed weird and uncommercial, could save the song from becoming a major commercial failure.
I came home the other night, much to your surprise.
By April 1968, the days when the Troggs were a commercially successful band were long gone. After the success of Love Us All Around in 1967, the group tried to replicate the success of the song with a similar sounding ballad called Little Girl. But the relative lack of success of that track prompted the Troggs to go back to their basic rocking roots with this tune called Surprise Surprise.
I need you.
The melody maker wrote,
Get your boots on and start stomping. Trog Reg Presley jumps into his jiving smock and starts a riot with this exciting piece of troggery. The drums batter away behind his menacing vocals, and there is some fabulous boogie piano. Yeah, a great sound and a fantastic hit.
Despite the excellent reviews, the single failed to chart.
Wish I was fine. Sometimes it's not so good to be alive.
One of the main differences between British and American psychedelia, especially after the second half of 1967, is that British psychedelia tended to be more whimsical and introspective. And from a lyrical point of view, many songs dealt with topics such as childhood and the longing for childhood innocence. This B-side by a band called Scrug was very much in the style of those whimsical psychedelic songs that became popular during the second half of 1967. This track became a cult favorite years later, mostly due to its appearance on compilations such as the Second Nuggets box set. Band member John Kongos, who also wrote and produced the song, achieved solo success later in the early 70s with tracks such as He's Gonna Step on You Again, which became a top 10 single in Britain in 1971. He's Gonna Step on You Again is cited in the Guinness Book of Records as being the first song to ever use a sample.
Yes, it's happened to me. Yes, at last I can see.
Grapefruit were one of the first bands to get signed to the Beatles' Apple Publishing. And this double A-side single was their second release. The group featured singer and bass guitarist George Alexander, who was the older brother of the Easy Beats guitarist George Young, and also older brother of Angus and Malcolm Young from AC/DC. Both sides of the single were excellent songs, very much in the psychedelic pop style that defined many of the band's releases. Record Mirror wrote,
2 A-sides, which may prove a mistake. Yes is the side for me, a direct and powerful beater with a strong vocal line and tremendous backbeat. It pushes along with immensely catchy moments, and it's certainly commercial. Elevator is also powerful, but it moves along on a more straightforward melody line.
Despite the decent success of their debut 45, which reached number 21, this second single failed to reach the charts. And as a final and curious note, here's one of the few bands from that period who covered a song from the album Their Satanic Majesty's Request by the Stones. This cover was not a patch on the original by Jagger and Richards, but it's still fun to listen to. This was the first single by the Glass Menagerie, who released 5 singles before breaking up in late 1969. I hope you enjoyed this trip back to April 1968. See you next time.